Hello, friends. Wearing my hat again. You know what that means. I have another holiday story. This is from one of my favorite authors. I know I say that a lot, but she really is one of my favorite authors. And maybe you've heard of her. Her name is Jan Brett. She has written many, many stories. And do you know the story The Mitten? Or the story The Hat? Or The Night Before Christmas? That's an old story that she retold. Well, this one is one that she wrote, and it's called The Wild Christmas Reindeer. There's a lot of words. Mrs. Short's going to try her best to get through it all. So I'm dedicating this to all of you. And Jan Brett, she illustrated it too, is dedicating it to Natalie and Stephanie Larson. And it's pretty big, so I hope I can see all the pictures here. There we go. Tika was excited and a little afraid. This year Santa had asked her to get the reindeer ready to fly on Christmas Eve. Tika had never done this before and she wanted everything to be perfect. Tika lived up in the Arctic and in the shadow of Santa's winter farm. The last of the snow geese had flown south and everyone's mind was on Christmas. The workshop was alive with the sounds of saws sawing and hammers hammering and brushes painting as they all worked to have the toys and presents ready for delivery on Christmas Eve. And as I'm reading, please try your best to look at all of the pictures. And I'll try my best so that you can see them all. Tika knew it was time for her to go in search of the reindeer. They had been out in the tundra, wild and free, since last Christmas, and Tika was sure that they wouldn't want to go back to Winter Farm to train. She would have to be strong and firm. At last she found them, Bramble and Heather, Windswept and Lichen, Snowball, Crag, Twilight, and Tundra. Tika took a big breath and shouted, "Let's go! Move! Move!" The reindeer were bewildered by Tika's voice. Their heads went up to see who this loud creature was. But they let her herd them together and headed back toward Winter Farm. Tundra gave her the most trouble. Tika didn't know that he considered himself the leader and was not used to being bossed around. He liked to stay next to Twilight, but she was separated from him and running near the front. When they got to the barn, Tika put them in different stalls. Tundra snorted impatiently. By the next morning, when Tika went into the barn, all of the reindeer were restless and upset. Lichen was frightened of Crag, who kept nipping at him. Bramble was so worried she drove Heather wild. And Twilight kept calling out to Tundra, who was just plain angry and stamping his hooves. Tika groomed each reindeer, meaning got them ready. She wanted them to look sleek and glossy for Santa, and one by one she brushed and combed their coats and pushed and pulled at their tangled manes. She brushed so long and hard that their ears started to turn pink. Tika took the reindeer outside. Now she was ready for the real training to begin. Snowflakes danced in the air as she tried to stand them in two lines and put on their harnesses, but they wouldn't stay lined up. She had put Tundra at the back with Heather instead of at the front with Twilight, so he kicked out at Heather, who then bolted into Bramble. Tika scolded the reindeer. "Don't move," she cried, but they all ran off wild-eyed, and she had to go after them and bring them back. The next day, Tika harnessed the reindeer in the barn before taking them out into the snow. Everything went right until she got them lined up outside and tried to steer them first to the left and then to the right. And to make the sleigh fly, they would need to pull together smoothly. But everything went wrong. Tundra crashed into Heather, Snowball blew up at Bramble, Windswept knocked over Twilight, and then Lichen locked antlers with Crag. Stop! Tika cried. She watched the reindeer paw the air. Unhook! She shouted as they tried to free their long antlers. Then Lichen and Crag fell over into the snow, and the harder they pulled, the more their antlers locked. The reindeer were frantic, and Tika only made it worse by yelling at them. Oh boy. What do you think, boys and girls? Will they get it together? Tundra and Heather rushed to help, but the antlers did not break free. Windswept nudged at Lichen, and Bramble ran to help Crag. But the more they tried to help, the more they got tangled up themselves. Their necks strained and their muscles bulged, but their antlers did not budge. Tika wailed, "Oh, please, it's almost Christmas Eve." But the reindeer could not move. A frosty silence hung in the air. Tika looked at the tangled reindeer, once so bold and free, and began to cry. "It's my fault," she said. "I've spent all my time yelling at you instead of helping. I'm sorry." And one by one, she gave each reindeer a hug. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go to work in a new way. No yelling, no screaming, and no bossing. I promise. Let me try to help you get free." The reindeer listened to this new voice. Heather's eyes sparkled. Crag cracked a reindeer grin. Bramble giggled and Snowball sighed. Tundra laughed and Twilight smiled. The more they laughed, the more they shook, and as they shook, their antlers rattled and rubbed, and before Tika could do anything, she heard a spring, spring, sprung sound. It was the antlers jiggling free. Quietly, Tika led the reindeer back to the barn. She sleeked their coats, she gently brushed their ears, and combed out their manes. Tundra muzzled her cheek. The next day, the reindeer lined up in two lines, ready for the harness, and Twilight and Tundra leading the line. They practiced turning left and they practiced turning right. Tika directed them softly. Tundra pulled for Twilight. Bramble was gentle to Lichen. Windswept helped Heather, and Snowball nestled against Crag. Together they practiced long and hard. They didn't notice that it was getting dark, and they almost didn't hear a jingle in the distance. It was Santa standing by the sleigh, piled high with presents and ready to go. Now the reindeer were ready too, and Tika led them to the sleigh. Santa smiled and nodded his thanks. Then he climbed aboard and waved to Tika, who was watched as the wild reindeer rose up together and carried the sleigh off into the night. And it looks like time for Tika to sleep. I hope you enjoyed this book, boys and girls, The Wild Christmas Reindeer. I will see you next time. Bye, friends.